March 19, 2008 marked the 5th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. In 2008, the American people will elect a new president.
But unless voters look beyond the campaign rhetoric to the reality of what the invasion and occupation have cost both us and the Iraqis, there is no guarantee that the election will produce a real change in policy that ends the terrible waste of lives and resources.
We will only change the course we are on if each of us takes personal responsibility to get involved. We can't be passive consumers of Madison Avenue marketing that political campaigns feed us as a substitute for real debate.
If what you see here disturbs you, we urge you to get involved, to actively demand a real change from the disastrous course we have been on.
We pay federal taxes to support our government so that it can meet our needs by protecting those most vulnerable, creating opportunities for our children, conserving the environment and our communities, and improving the quality of our lives.
Our government should use our tax money to serve the common good, not the interests of a privileged elite, the super rich and politically connected.
Instead of serving the common good, the Bush administration, with the support of Congress, took our country to war over the objections of the world community, in violation of international law and our treaty obligations. In 2007, the decision to go to war cost us $137 billion. We paid for that decision not just in dollars, but in lives. We paid for Bush's war in lost jobs and services that $137 billion of our money could have created. The funds that went to war were no longer available to meet our needs at home. What could we have done with $137 billion?
These are some of the things we might have done with $137 billion. We could add to that list things like aid to people who are at risk of losing their homes due to the deceptive practices of profit-hungry mortgage brokers, or replacing our degraded infrastructure to avoid more bridge collapses, levee failures, and other tragedies. You can probably think of many other important needs that could be met with $137 billion.
In 2008, George Bush asked Congress for another $162 billion for occupation. Despite the fact that the voters gave Congress a mandate to end the war in 2006 congressional elections, Congress gave him the money. That money is in addition to the $66.4 billion that Congress already appropriated for 2008. So far, Congress has appropriated more than $700 billion for the war. Bush can now keep the war going until he leaves office and beyond, unless we act to compel Congress to stop him.
The occupations cost the American people $720 million a day, or $500,000 every minute of every day. That's the average daily total for real present and future costs for the war. When you add all real costs, including lifelong medical care for injured veterans, interest on the huge debt created by war, plus replacement of military equipment and other future costs, the war and occupation have a price tag of more than $1 trillion in the first 4 years alone. The occupation has destroyed the lives of more than 4,100 U.S. troops, more than 1,100 private contractors, and according to at least 2 highly respected studies, 1 million or more Iraqis. Add to those lost lives the people who have been wounded or injured during military duty. The total number of U.S. military casualties is now over 87,000. The President and politicians never talk about that number.
President Bush gave us one reason after another to justify his decision to invade Iraq. Like weapons of mass destruction that were never found. like Saddam Hussein being in cahoots with Osama bin Laden. In fact, bin Laden hated Saddam because he promoted a secular rather than a religious society. Like bringing freedom and democracy to Iraqis, what the U.S. did was invade Iraq and destroy much of its infrastructure. Bush didn't mention giving his oil industry cronies access to the world's second or third largest reservoir of oil. But Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, finally wrote the truth. Greenspan admitted the Iraq War is largely about oil. Greenspan could have added something about those cushy cost-plus no-bid contracts that Bush and Cheney doled out to corporate buddies.
When Bush realized that his Iraqi cakewalk was a quagmire, he mobilized the National Guard and Reserve to beef up U.S. forces there. When they left for Iraq, they took a lot of the heavy equipment that the National Guard keeps handy in the event of natural disaster. So, when Hurricanes Katrina and Rita hit, emergency equipment and the forces to operate it were sitting in Iraq, unavailable for rescue and reconstruction in Louisiana and Mississippi. Funds needed to rebuild areas devastated by hurricanes were lining the pockets of Bechtel, Blackwater, Kellogg Brown and Root, and other giant corporations. The war created more than 4 million Iraqi refugees. It also turned hundreds of thousands of Americans into refugees in their own country. 2 years after Katrina, most of the people displaced from the U.S. Gulf Coast are still waiting for help, living in trailers or with relatives all over the country.
The price we've paid to make war isn't just economic. It's also paid by losing our rights. President Bush used 9/11 to justify war abroad. He also launched a war at home against working people and the poor. One of Bush's first targets was organized labor. He transferred 170,000 federal workers, most of them already under union contract, to the new Department of Homeland Security. Then he declared they no longer were eligible for union representation in the name of national security. Bush pushed and Congress passed the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, and other measures that compromised, eroded, and nullified our precious constitutional rights and personal liberties in the name of national security.
Congress gave Bush all the money he wanted to wage war in Iraq. But 47 million of us go without medical insurance. Our schools are falling apart. Students don't have books and teachers don't have basic supplies. Our infrastructure is crumbling. Essential social services like Head Start, community food and nutrition, youth job training, affordable housing, maternal and child health care, aid to the poor and the most vulnerable, all these have been cut, while tax cuts for the super rich and subsidies for corporations remain. Our nation is growing divided, split into two groups, the privileged elite, the haves, and a swelling number, the have-nots. Between 2000 and 2006, the number of people in poverty grew from by more than 6 million to 36.5 million. Those living in extreme poverty are more than at any time since records started to be kept in 1975. The American middle class is crushed down by debt, foreclosures, and bankruptcy. For the price of 1 day of occupation, we could provide health care to 400,000 children, or we could feed school lunches to more than 1 million kids a year.
The U.S. Department of Defense reports over 39,000 non-mortal military casualties in Iraq. They don't say anything about the 20,000 others who didn't report injuries or illness until after they returned home. 25% of returning veterans have filed for long-term disability. 20,000 troops not classified as wounded during combat in Iraq or Afghanistan have signs of brain injuries. 1,700 have confirmed brain injuries. Their care alone will cost $20 billion over the next 20 years. 1/4 of the 100,000 soldiers who served in Iraq and Afghanistan suffered from some form of mental illness or addiction. Veterans make up 25% of all homeless, yet are only 11% of the adult population. On any night in America, nearly 300,000 vets are homeless. Bush talks about supporting the troops, but he cuts veterans' benefits. Vets needing medical care and social services wait in growing lines or go without proper treatment.
Look at what the war costs those we send to fight. More than 1 in 3, 34% of veterans of the first Gulf War are on permanent medical disability. Only 382 U.S. troops died during the first Gulf War, but 10,700 have died since. 240,000 others are on permanent medical disability. What does the war cost the children of soldiers? In one VA study of 251 Gulf War I vets in Mississippi, 67% of their children were born with severe birth defects. One or both parents had been exposed to depleted uranium weapons used by the U.S. against the Iraqis, on top of all the other toxic exposures that war creates. Depleted uranium, DU, does terrible, permanent damage to people who come in contact with it. Because radiation from DU tears up DNA, the genetic identity passed from parent to child, DU can injure soldiers and their descendants. DU lasts forever. The U.S. fired 290.3 metric tons of depleted uranium projectiles during Desert Storm, the first Gulf War, and we continue to use them to this day. Depleted uranium remains radioactive for 4.5 billion years.
One of Bush's excuses for going to war was to make America safer, to, quote, fight them there so we don't have to fight them here. But Iraq wasn't a source or supporter of terrorism. By invading and illegally occupying Iraq, Bush enraged thousands who now seek revenge. They've lost loved ones, homes, jobs, communities, and a sense of personal dignity, security, and national sovereignty. Globally, in the 3 years before 9/11, there were on average 106 terrorist incidents per month. In the 5 years since 9/11, the average number of incidents increased 270%, 284 per month. Bush has managed to turn a world that was ready to stand with us after 9/11 into a world against us. Our country would be more secure if people respected it, but it is less secure when people fear it.
George Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, and the U.S. General Accounting Office studied the costs of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Their studies show that over the next 10 years, the wars will cost us nearly $2.5 trillion or more. Even if the next president cuts the military occupation forces in half by 2011, we will pay through 2017 at least another $1 trillion for operations. In addition, we'll have to pay $705 billion more in interest on the money the U.S. will have to borrow to pay for the war.
We may not even know the real economic cost of the war. A big chunk of the money we shell out for taxes is taken for military operations that are never reported. In 2007, the official military budget was more than $530 billion. That figure did not include some big costs, nuclear weapons, veteran services, or even the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Billions of dollars in federal spending are buried in the black budget. The size of that budget is secret.
Added all together, military spending eats up more than half of every dollar the federal government spends. Spending for human resources, mostly services we need, claims 32% of the federal budget. But the military takes 51 cents of every federal dollar to pay for either current or past military expenditures.
The U.S. claims to be the only superpower in the world. It's also a military super spender. In 2005, all the governments of the world paid a total of $1.12 trillion for defense. Almost half of that, 48%, was spent by the United States. In the same time, the countries Bush called the axis of evil, the countries he said were the most dangerous threats we face, Iran, Libya, Syria, North Korea, Cuba, together spent only 1% of the world total. Iran's defense spending is less than 0.5% of the global total.
Our country has been paying huge amounts of money for arms and aggression, far more than it collects in current taxes. It pays by borrowing the money. In the last 5 years, the national debt increased by $2.5 trillion. That's $25 followed by 11 zeros. Who will have to pay this bill? Our children, our grandchildren, and their children. We used to believe that no matter how hard things were for us, our kids would have a better life. That's no longer true. We are mortgaging the future for generations to come. If what you've seen upsets you,
if you want to be part of the solution,
if you want to take back our country and put it on a different course,
we invite you to join us. Become an individual member of U.S. Labor Against the War by donating $25 or more per year. Join with others to urge your union or other labor organization to become an affiliate of U.S. Labor Against the War.
Support this important work with a financial donation. Get a copy of this presentation, show it at work, show it to your neighbors and your family. Find out how to do these things by visiting the U.S. Law website, or write to us by email, or send us a letter.
Together we can turn things around, end the occupation, bring all the troops home, change our nation's priorities so that it meets human need, not corporate greed. Join us. You can use U.S. Labor Against the War's toll-free number, 866-261-4755, to call your congressperson or senator. Tell them you oppose the continuing Iraq occupation, the phony war on terror, and wasteful military spending. You can also write them a letter. Tell them to revoke the open-ended authorization for war they gave George Bush in 2003. Tell them to only allocate monies to bring our troops and contractors home. Funding the war is killing our troops. Show this DVD to others so they can learn the real price of military occupation. Show it to union members, to members of your church, your community organizations, to your family and friends. You are not alone. You can ask veterans who have been in Iraq to explain the occupation. Contact Iraq Veterans Against the War, www.ivaw.org. or Veterans for Peace, www.veteransforpeace.org.
Help U.S. Law to oppose the occupation of Iraq by making a financial contribution. Ask your union to contribute and to affiliate with U.S. Law. Demonstrate your opposition to the occupation of Iraq as soon as you can.
This slideshow in English or Spanish can be viewed, downloaded, or ordered on DVD. To order a copy, visit USLAW website. That's www.uslaboragainstwar.org.
Order several copies. Donate a copy to your local library or children's school. Ask your coworkers, friends, neighbors, and family to invest 20 minutes to watch this slideshow. Ask your union to show it at membership meetings.
Thank you for investing this time.